I saved a beautiful CEO. What she did next changed my life forever. Daniel Reyes had learned to expect very little from life. At 29, he spent his nights driving a delivery van through the quiet streets of the city, dropping off packages at doors that were rarely opened by the people who ordered them. He worked late because the night shift paid a little more, and a little more was what he needed. His mother's medical bills had eaten through his savings 2 years earlier, and even though she was recovering well now, the debt remained, sitting on his shoulders like a weight he could not put down. Before this job, Daniel had been a mechanic in the army. He had spent years fixing engines under pressure, in places far from home, learning to stay calm when everything around him was not calm at all. That training had shaped him in ways he didn't always notice. It showed in the way he checked his mirrors twice before pulling into a parking spot, the way he scanned a room when he entered it, the way he never quite relaxed, even when things were peaceful. It was a Tuesday night, a little after 11, when his last delivery of the shift took him past a parking garage downtown. The street was empty except for the hum of distant traffic and the flicker of a street lamp that hadn't been fixed in months. As he walked back to his van, he heard a sharp, frightened voice coming from the garage entrance. He didn't think, he simply moved toward the sound. Inside the garage, under the weak yellow light, a woman was backed against her car. 2 men stood close to her, blocking her path, their voices low and threatening. She wasn't screaming anymore. She had gone quiet, in the way people do when fear takes over completely, and that quiet was somehow louder than any scream could have been. Daniel didn't shout or hesitate. He walked forward with the steady confidence of someone who had been trained to handle tense situations without losing his composure. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm enough to shift the energy in the garage. The 2 men turned, sizing him up. Whatever they saw in his posture, in the steadiness of his stance, made them reconsider. Words were exchanged, tension hung in the air for a long moment, and then, just as quickly as it had started, the 2 men backed away and disappeared into the shadows of the parking structure, choosing not to test their luck any further. The woman let out a breath she had clearly been holding. She was trembling, her hands shaking as she gripped her car keys. Daniel stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. "Do you need me to call someone?" She shook her head, then nodded, then shook her head again, the kind of confused response that comes after a scare. "I'm okay," she finally said. "I think I'm okay. Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel told her. "Let's just get you somewhere safe." He waited with her until security from a nearby building arrived, and then waited a little longer until she felt steady enough to be on her own. It was only as she was thanking him for the 3rd time that he learned her name, Elena Voss. He didn't recognize it at first, but something about the way she carried herself, even shaken and frightened, suggested she was used to being in charge of things. He gave her his name when she asked, almost as an afterthought, already thinking about getting back to his van and finishing his shift. He didn't expect to see her again. People said thank you in moments like that, and then life moved on, the way it always did. But life had other plans. 3 days later, as Daniel was walking out of his apartment building before his shift, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked outside, sleek and out of place on his quiet street. A woman stepped out of it, and it took him a second to recognize her without the fear on her face. Elena Voss looked different in daylight, dressed in business clothes, her hair neatly styled, the picture of someone in complete control of her world. "I hope this isn't strange," she said, walking toward him. "It took some effort to find you. You left before I could even get your last name." Daniel smiled, a little surprised. "I wasn't trying to disappear. I just had deliveries to finish." "Of course you did," she said, almost laughing at herself. "I wanted to thank you properly. What you did the other night, I don't think you understand what it meant. Those men could have done anything. You didn't even hesitate." "I just reacted," Daniel said, shrugging it off the way he shrugged off most praise. "Anyone would have done the same." Elena studied him for a moment, the way someone studies a puzzle they're trying to figure out. "Not many people would have," she said. "Most people would have walked past, told themselves it wasn't their business, and kept going. You didn't." They stood there for a moment, the morning sun rising slowly over the buildings around them, neither quite sure what to say next. Elena finally broke the silence by asking if he had time for coffee. Daniel hesitated, glancing at his watch, calculating whether he could afford to be even a few minutes late. "I really do need to get to work," he admitted. "I can't afford to lose this job." Something flickered across Elena's face, a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Then let me ask you something quickly, because I think it matters. What did you do before this job?" "I was a mechanic in the army," he said. "Engines, equipment, vehicles. I kept things running, even when everything else was falling apart." Elena nodded slowly, as though some piece of information had just clicked into place. "I run a company," she said. "A growing one. We have a fleet of vehicles and equipment that's becoming harder to manage every month. I need someone who understands machines, someone who stays calm under pressure, someone I can trust." She paused, looking at him directly. "I think that someone might be you." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am," she said simply. "Not because of what happened in the garage, because of how you've handled everything since. You didn't ask for anything that night. You didn't even seem to want credit. That tells me more about a person than almost anything else could." Daniel felt a familiar wariness rise in his chest. He had grown used to disappointment, used to promises that fell apart, used to being careful about trusting good things when they appeared too easily. "I don't want charity," he said honestly. "I don't need someone feeling sorry for me." "This isn't charity," Elena said, her tone firm now, businesslike. "This is me recognizing value when I see it. I wouldn't offer this to someone I didn't believe could do the job well. If you take it and you're not right for it, I'll know within a month, and so will you. But I don't think that's going to happen." There was something in the way she said it, direct and unwavering, that made Daniel believe her. He thought about his mother, still recovering, still needing support. He thought about the debt that never seemed to shrink no matter how many extra shifts he worked. He thought about the years he had spent fixing things that other people gave up on, and how no one had ever offered him a chance to use those skills again, not since he left the service. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come in and talk. No promises beyond that." Elena smiled, the first full smile he had seen from her. "That's all I'm asking." The interview, when it happened, felt less like a test and more like a conversation between two people who already understood each other a little. Daniel answered questions about engines, scheduling, logistics, and problem-solving, and with every answer, he felt more confident that he actually knew what he was talking about. By the end of the week, he had accepted the position overseeing the company's vehicle fleet and equipment maintenance. The first few months were not easy. The systems at the company were outdated, and many of the vehicles had been poorly maintained for years. Daniel worked long hours, often staying late to inspect machines himself, rather than trust reports that didn't add up. He treated the job the way he had treated his service in the army, with discipline, attention to detail, and a quiet kind of pride in doing things correctly, even when no one was watching. It was during one of those late nights that Daniel noticed something strange. The receipts for parts and repairs didn't match what he was actually seeing on the vehicles. Some equipment listed as replaced was clearly still the original. Numbers had been adjusted in ways that didn't make sense unless someone was deliberately hiding something. He spent days quietly comparing records, checking serial numbers, and tracing invoices back to their source. What he found was a pattern of dishonesty that had been going on for over a year, a scheme where a supplier and an employee within the company had been overcharging for parts that were never delivered, splitting the difference between themselves. It was the kind of quiet, hidden problem that could have continued for years if no one had looked closely enough to notice. Daniel brought everything he found to Elena, laying out the evidence carefully, calmly, the same way he had once explained engine problems to commanding officers who needed clear answers, not excuses. Elena listened in silence, flipping through the documents he had gathered, her expression growing more serious with every page. "You found this on your own?" she asked. "I just noticed the numbers didn't add up," Daniel said. "I couldn't let it go once I saw it." Elena leaned back in her chair, looking at him with something close to amazement. "Do you understand what this means? This wasn't a small leak. This was money disappearing from the company every single month, and no one noticed." "I noticed," Daniel said simply. The company acted quickly once the issue came to light, ending the dishonest arrangement and correcting the practices that had allowed it to continue. Word spread quietly through the company about what Daniel had uncovered, and the way people looked at him began to change. He was no longer just the new hire who had once helped the CEO. He was someone who paid attention, someone who cared about doing things right, someone the company genuinely needed. Elena began stopping by his office more often, not to check on his work, but simply to talk. She asked about his mother, about his time in the service, about the small details of his life that most people never bothered to ask about. Daniel found himself looking forward to those conversations more than he expected to. There was an ease between them that had nothing to do with titles or positions, just two people who respected each other and enjoyed each other's company. Months passed, and Daniel's life slowly transformed. With a stable income and a job that felt meaningful, he was finally able to pay off the last of his mother's medical debt. He remembered calling her with the news, the relief in her voice impossible to miss, the years of worry finally beginning to lift. He moved into a slightly bigger apartment, nothing extravagant, but enough to feel like progress instead of survival. He started sleeping better at night, no longer haunted by calculations of bills and shifts, and how much further his paycheck needed to stretch. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something instead of simply holding on. One evening, as the office quieted down and most employees had gone home, Elena found Daniel in the garage where the company vehicles were kept, finishing up a final inspection before the night shift took over. She leaned against the doorway, watching him for a moment before he noticed her. "You're still here," she said. "Force of habit," Daniel replied, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I like making sure everything's right before I leave." Elena smiled, walking closer. "You know, it's strange to think about how this all started. One night, one decision to step forward instead of walking past. I think about that a lot." Daniel looked at her, the easy warmth between them settling into something quieter, something that felt like the beginning of an understanding neither of them had rushed into. "I just did what felt right," he said. "I never expected it to lead anywhere." "Sometimes the smallest decisions change everything," Elena said softly. "I'm glad you made that one." Daniel didn't have a clever response for that. He simply nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle over him. He thought about the man he had been a year earlier, exhausted and uncertain, carrying weight that never seemed to lighten. He thought about how one ordinary night, one choice to step into a garage instead of walking past it, had quietly rewritten the direction of his entire life. He had not saved Elena that night expecting anything in return, but somehow, in saving her, he had found his own way forward. A steady job, a sense of purpose, a friendship that continued to grow into something neither of them had planned, but both of them welcomed. As he locked up the garage and walked out into the cool night air, Daniel allowed himself something he rarely did, a quiet sense of peace. Life had been hard for a long time, but standing there, looking back at how far he had come, he understood something simple and true. Sometimes the most important moments in life arrive without warning, disguised as ordinary nights and small decisions. And sometimes, those moments are the ones that change everything.